Well, I'd like to welcome everybody that's joined us. We are opening our event now. Thank you for joining us for our first webinar on starting a business in Texas. And I can see people are joining us at a nice fast rate. So thank you very much again. While we're waiting for people to arrive, I'm going to post our accommodations slide. This lets everybody know that we have captioning available for the hard of hearing. The link is there. My colleague Sam is going to post that link in the featured feed so that you can cut and paste it into your browser and access this service if it's interesting to you. We also have transcripts available for the event. They're available from our website within 48 hours, often around 24 hours. And again, you can access it through that link. Both the captioning link and the access to the transcript link are available in this slide deck, and you can click on those later when we share this deck with you. While we are sharing the accommodations notice and everybody's getting into their seats, so to speak, we want to ask you an interactive question, audience. We're interested to know where you are in your startup journey. And so my colleague Sam is going to post 2 statements in the featured feed. If you could like the statement that is most relevant to you. So we realize not everybody is starting a business or has started a business, but for people who are thinking about it or already have and recently, could you please like which statement is more relevant to you? Because we're interested to know where you are on your startup journey. So have a look in the featured feed and do please like a statement that's relevant. So now I'm going to move on and I'm going to hand things over to our Executive Director, Adriana Cruz, who's going to open this event. Over to you, Adriana.
Thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. As Kelly said, I'm Adriana Cruz. I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Development and Tourism Office here in the Office of Governor Abbott. On behalf of Governor Abbott and the entire team at the Economic Development and Tourism Office, I want to thank you for joining us today and welcome you here for the Governor's Small Business Webinar. Our small business team puts together these webinars in order to provide our small business owners with timely and relevant information that you can use as we navigate these challenging times. We know that Texas small businesses are the backbone of the Texas economy, and we are here to help you in your journey as you look to open a small business, if you're interested in entrepreneurship. And we also want to thank you for everything that you do to help keep our economy going every day. Please know that the small business team at the Economic Development and Tourism Office is here to assist you. I know that many of you have joined us for some of our past webinars, and I want to thank you for joining us then and for joining us today. Some of our prior webinars focused on the EIDL program and on the PPP programs. Today we're changing things around and we're going to focus on how to start a business. We've got a panel of experts that we're going to hear from that are going to cover everything from registering your business, business and permitting, licensing, and where you can get free help and advice. So with that, I'm not going to talk anymore for opening remarks. We want to get right into the program. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly, our office's small business advocate, Kelly Spillane. Thank you.
Great, Adriana, thank you very much. And so we're going to pause again and ask another interactive question. We're going to ask you, audience, do you have a business plan? And again, my colleague Sam is going to post 2 statements in the featured feed. Please like the one that's most relevant to you. We're interested to know, do you have one? Is it important to you? And so on. So please like one of those statements. Thank you very much. And I see lots of people have already liked the first question. So we appreciate your engagement and your interest in doing so. So thank you. I'm going to move along and I'm going to put this slide up because I think it's really important to remind ourselves how lucky we are to be in the great state of Texas, which is the best state in the union to start a business and run a business. And these accolades here are what other people say about us. So it isn't just proud Texans thinking this. This is what the outside world thinks of Texas. So I think it's important to remind ourselves we're lucky to be here. And so just to talk for a moment about this webinar, it's about the very, very early stage of starting up. We're going to be focusing on the information that you need at that early stage. We will revisit the subject of starting up again. It's a complex subject. There's a lot to it. And so our hope is to cover other angles of starting up in future webinars. After this event, you all will receive an email that has a link to a survey, and there's an opportunity in that survey to give us your view on what you'd like to hear about in the future, not just about other webinar topics, but also aspects of starting up. If you'd like to let us know, we'd really like to hear about that. So thank you. And I'll take this moment again to ask our third and final interactive question. I hope you don't mind. Our last question is, do you need funding? And again, Sam is going to post 2 statements in the feed. Please like the one that's most relevant to you. Do you need funding? Yes or no, essentially. So we're very interested to know about that. And thank you for taking the time to give us your view. I'll just say again about this webinar, our focus here is talking to you about knowledge, connections, and money, because those are the 3 key things that you need. And in my opinion and experience, you need them in that order: knowledge, connections, and money. Because if you don't have the right knowledge and the right connections, you may not make the best use of that money. And also you may not make the best use of your own time. And so with that, I will move along and introduce our panelists. We have 4 today. We have Kevin Tipton. He's a state attorney with the Secretary of State's office, and he looks after the Business and Public Filings Division. We have Jessica Garcia. She is a tax compliance specialist with the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. And we have our own colleague, Sonia Gilliard. She is a business permit specialist at the Office of the Governor, and we work closely with her. She is truly an expert. We're delighted to have her join us. And then we also have our final panelist, Alex Plotkin. Alex is a senior business advisor at the Small Business Development Center in Collin County. Alex has joined us before. He's a great generalist, but a great expert on many subjects. So we have a really excellent panel of people who can answer your questions and deal with the key topics that you guys need to hear about, especially if you're starting a business. So before we move along to talk to them, I'll just say that we will have a live Q&A feature to this event. It's going to essentially be the second half of the event, but we won't open the live Q&A feed until we're about halfway through the frequently asked questions, because this gives you an opportunity to focus on what we're addressing in the frequently asked questions, so you don't ask that question and may ask a better question, in fact, for the live Q&A. So we'll let you know when it's open and you can type in your questions. My colleague will publish the broadly relevant questions that each of our panelists will be able to address. And as you see them being published in that featured feed, like the ones that you're most interested in hearing the answer to, because we will prioritize those. We don't get to every question, and so it is important that you like the ones that you do want to hear, because we will prioritize those. Contact information for the panelists and ourselves will be included in this deck, and you will have access to the deck after the event. So don't worry, if your question isn't answered, you can reach out directly. So thank you. And so we're going to start our frequently asked questions by talking to Kevin Tipton, the state attorney at the Secretary of State's office. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us. So Kevin, I'm going to kick off with the obvious question that me and my colleagues get asked all the time. It's about picking a legal entity or a business structure to kick off with. So what are the most commonly formed business types, and how do I pick one? And you may be muted, Kevin. So Kevin is muted. Kevin, you just have to unmute your mic.
Gotcha.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So you heard the question, and let's hear your answer. Okay, Kevin, we can't hear you, and you are actually not muted.
Okay, how about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what's going on.
That's okay.
So the most commonly formed entity types with our office are going to be LLCs. And then there's also sole proprietorships, which are going to be separate. We got some data right here for you with regard to the Secretary of State's office. You can see all of the common filing types, for-profit corporations, professional entities, nonprofits, LLCs. As you can see, LLCs make up 63% of the entities that are formed with our office, and then for-profit corporations make up the bulk of the rest of them. The other entity types, they're formed, but they're more specialized. So some of those may be appropriate to you, but I imagine most of you are going to be looking at either for-profit corporations, LLCs, or the big one that is not filed with us, like I said, is going to be sole proprietorships. So that's the first part of that question answered. Before we get to the second part, though, I want to backtrack a little bit and just clarify. A lot of people, when I get questions about this kind of thing, maybe don't fully grasp the difference between something like a sole proprietorship and an LLC. Those are actually two different entity types. So LLCs, I know some people will think single member LLCs are sole proprietorships or something along those lines. I've seen a lot of misinformation spread about that. So I just want to highlight that these are separate entities. So when you're reading and considering what you should be forming, keep that in mind. An LLC and a sole proprietorship are very, very different, and they are not the same. You can have a single member LLC and it can function in a lot of ways like a sole proprietorship, but they're not the same thing. The second part of the question, which is probably the more important part, how do you pick one of those? Well, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Obviously, there's tax implications. If you've talked with an accountant about it, they probably have some opinions on what you should do, and definitely considering how you'll be taxed and that sort of thing is very important. But that's not the only thing you should be considering. So if you've gone to an accountant and they said, hey, you definitely need a sole proprietorship or you definitely need a corporation or whatever, just take a pause, consider some of the other issues as well. You've got liability. That's a huge benefit of limited liability companies and other entities that are formed with our office versus a sole proprietorship. They give you a lot of protection that you won't have legally. And that protection is sort of like insurance, basically. Just keep in mind that, we always hope nothing bad is going to happen or nothing's going to go wrong. But if it does, you want to have that protection there potentially. So consider what sort of protections you're giving up going with a sole proprietorship versus another entity type. Then you've also got things like management, continuity, transferring ownership interests and that sort of thing. If you've got a partner, obviously you can't have a sole proprietorship. Maybe you want a general partnership, maybe you want an LLC. There's a lot of factors. So make sure you put a lot of thought into this, is the bottom line.
Great. And, we'll also say it's always a good idea to talk to a CPA too. Ideally, if it's a friend, and at the beginning when your funds may be short, to talk to a couple of different CPAs who might have a coffee with you and give you some, expert guidance on your thinking. So I'll move on to that second question, Kevin. Thank you. Can I register a business directly, or must I do this through a CPA or another company? And by this I mean, can a person go onto the Secretary of State's website and just register that company themselves? And if so, how much does it cost?
So the easy answer to this is yes, you absolutely can. If it's an entity that's formed with our office, which is going to be, again, LLCs, corporations, everything on that slide that I gave you earlier with the data. If you want to form one of those, it's formed with our office. The price for most of them is going to be about $300, but it does vary. Nonprofits are a bit cheaper. Partnerships, limited partnerships can be more expensive, can be cheaper. So it varies, but LLCs and for-profit corporations, which most of you are probably looking towards, are going to be $300. So that's the easy part. There's two really good ways to file with us. First, there's SOS Direct. That's our online web service. It creates a form for you. So it's very, hopefully, easy to use. That's the goal. You'll just input the information. It'll ask you things like, what's the name? Who's going to be a director? Who's going to be a member? Sort of, that sort of thing. Who's your registered agent? Pretty simple. You just fill it out. You're good to go once you get submitted, and it gets approved, of course. The other option is SOS Upload. That's what you use if you want to draft your own certificate of formation, or maybe you talked with an attorney and they drafted one for you. You can submit via SOS Upload and just upload that directly. And that one's pretty quick as well. Of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't say you can also file by fax or mail. as well as through courier service. If you are working with, a registered agent service or something like that, and they offer drop-off services, you can do that as well. Those services, though, I will say, especially due to COVID-19, are a bit more backed up. The quickest way by far to file is online through SOS Direct or SOS Upload. And final note, if you did want a sole proprietorship, it's actually not filed with us at all. You'd want to talk with your local county about that one.
Okay. Excellent. Great. And there's information here. There's email addresses and links that Kevin has provided. And again, our audience will have access to that through the slide deck after the event. So don't worry too much about writing things down. You'll be able to access that quite easily and conveniently. And so thank you, Kevin, for all of that. Kevin's available for the live Q&A portion. If anybody has particular questions, you can write them into the feed as soon as we let you know. And so we're going to move along now. We're going to talk to Jessica Garcia, the Tax Compliance Officer at the Comptroller of Public Accounts Office. And so thank you, Jessica, for joining us. The first question I want to ask you is, what are the main taxes that I need to register for, and how do I do that? And then a kind of second piece to that, when and how often do I need to pay these taxes? The important bit, when and how often do I need to pay these taxes? So over to you, Jessica. And I think you're muted, Jessica, so just unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so the main taxes that you'll need to register for, well, as operate as a small business, would be sales tax for one, because it depends upon what you are selling. If you're selling taxable items or providing a taxable service, you can apply for our sales tax permit, which is available online through our web file system, or you can go online to our website and print out the application and mail it in, and we can get you set up there. The other tax to that will be franchise tax. But let me go back real quick to sales tax. Sales tax, for the second part of that question, you're either going to pay that to us on a monthly, quarterly, or yearly basis. We will notify you with your letter when you first get, the acceptance, how you're set up for filing, and then we'll monitor you from there. The second part, as far as depending on how you're operating, if you are a corporation or a limited liability company, and you are doing business here in the state of Texas or have a sales tax permit, you would also be subject to franchise tax, which is a business tax for doing business here in the state of Texas. And that is filed once a year. It's due every May 15th of each year. And depending on how much revenue you had compared to our threshold set for that year will determine if you owe taxes or not. Either or on both of these, you do got to file the report.
Okay, great. And so the second question for you, Jessica, is if I sell to customers out of state, do I need to return sales tax in Texas on these transactions?
Actually, no. The sale of tangible personal property that is shipped or delivered to a point outside of Texas is exempt from per our statute 151.330. So for those who have a sales tax permit, your proof will be the copy of your delivery receipt. You'll keep that for your records to show it was delivered outside the state. So there is no Texas sales tax to collect.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you, Jessica. And so at this point, oh, sorry. Thank you, Jessica. At this point, we are opening our live Q&A feed now. So you can start typing your questions. And like I said, have a look at the featured feed where my colleague is going to publish questions that are broadly relevant. And if you're interested in the answers to any of them, please like them. And we'll prioritize the ones with the most likes because we are not going to be able to answer all the questions. So thank you. And I'm going to move along now and I'm going to talk to my own colleague, Sonia Gilliard, our permit specialist. And so thank you again, Sonia, for joining us. And my first question for you is, do I need a general business license in Texas? And where can I find out about what permits and licenses I need?
Thanks, Kelly. Before answering that question directly, allow me to provide a little context regarding the Business Permits Office. The Business Permits Office assists businesses in Texas by helping businesses navigate the regulatory space at the state level. Secondly, we assist in resolving any permitting issues that arise between state agencies and businesses. And thirdly, we create and maintain the comprehensive business licenses and permits guide. The permits guide is I'll answer the second part of that question first. The permits guide is where you would go in order to identify what permits and licenses are needed for your business type. That's how the guide is arranged. Now, there are instances where there could be permits or licenses that are specific to businesses that aren't listed, and that would be a great opportunity for a business owner to reach out and contact our office in order to help us identify, well, allow us to help you identify what licenses and permits are needed. There are instances where it could be a disruptive industry, for example, and we'll work with the necessary agencies in order to assist you in that regard. Now, the question that we get a lot is, do I need a general business license? The state of Texas does not have a general business license. What we do have is registration. And the registration that was just mentioned from the Secretary of State's office, that document that you receive after you form your business, that would satisfy the general business license request that you may receive from a distributor or a wholesaler. Sometimes there have been instances where businesses are applying for certain funding, and that organization wants to ensure that you are legitimately operating within the state. And when that happens, they request a business license. So remember that if you're in that scenario, then please provide them with your documents that you received from either the Secretary of State's office or your county clerk's office when you registered.
Okay. Excellent. We get asked that question a lot, so that's really important information, Sonia. Thank you. And so, where can I get information about the permits and licenses that I need? That is also a very important thing. And I know, Sonia, you've given a sizable amount of your life to making that easy for people. Please tell us about that.
Yes, so again, the Comprehensive Business Permits Guide, and you can find that on our landing page, and Kelly's showing a picture of that right now. At the bottom of that page, you'll see the download link there under Comprehensive Permit Guide. And also, because of COVID-19, we created a special FAQ on the right side of that page where it says download the FAQ, and it's focused on a number of inquiries that we receive, some specific to online retail businesses, home-based businesses, and number 5 in that FAQ is specific to COVID cleaning and sanitizing specific businesses as well. So you'll have information that provides a step-by-step on how to create those specific business types as well.
Excellent, Sonia. Thank you. And I'm going to pause here for a second too, because in that picture that you're looking at down in the lower right-hand corner is our guide to starting a business that the Office of the Governor has produced. And there's some really good starting up information, basically this, 7 steps that you might need to take and resources and information. So that's a useful guide. We have a link to that in the second last slide or in one of the very last slides in the deck, again, to make it easy for you to find your way to that. And so moving along to our second question for Sonia, my business was granted an exception by the Governor during the crisis. How do I know when this will revert to the pre-crisis rules?
The best thing that could be done in order to identify when that waiver is going to expire is to stay in communication with the agency that has oversight over that particular permit or license. Let me give you an example. The Department of Public Safety, they waived the expiration date of driver's licenses, commercial licenses, and other identification forms. And that particular waiver is in effect until 60 days after DPS publishes a public notice indicating that they will begin operating as normal. So in order to know when that's going to happen, either my recommendation would be to subscribe to whatever newsletter or information source, or frequently check the DPS website in order to be up to date on when those particular milestones are being met.
Super. Thank you so much, Sonia. And I'll just pause here for a second just to show you access points. Again, on our Business Permits Office page, access to the FAQs that Sonia has done. They're really excellent and comprehensive. And I'll just pause there for a second. I'm going to move along next to talk to Alex Plotkin. Alex is from the Small Business Development Center in Collin County. And Alex is going to tackle two really, really important topics that we asked you already about to answer where you stand on these things. And so it's really interesting to look at the numbers that we got before I actually ask the questions of Alex. I'm just going to say that we had, I suppose, a sizable proportion of people saying that they do not actually have a business plan yet, and we're going to talk about business planning. And then also a sizable amount of people who need funding, and that does not surprise us, of course, because again, that's a big question we get asked all the time: where can I get funding, and so on. And so Alex is going to tackle both of those important subjects, and I want to thank our audience again for joining in and liking those statements. That was really helpful to us. So Alex, thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to ask you the first question, which is: how important is a business plan at the early stage of setting up, and where can I find examples of what a good plan looks like?
Okay, thanks for having me, Kelly. I appreciate you asking me back. It's always a pleasure to be on one of these conferences and to help the citizens of Texas, especially with starting a business. Before I answer that question, I'd like to just put in a brief commercial for the Small Business Development Centers. I'm here representing really hundreds of business advisors all across the state of Texas who work every day to help people start businesses, grow businesses, obtain financing, and just generally boost the economy in Texas. If you are in the state of Texas, you're covered by one of these offices, and there's going to be a link at the end of the presentation for you to go and find an advisor. All of our services are at no charge to the users. And so we invite you to get in contact with us and allow us to help you. Specifically getting into that first question about the business plan, it looked like about 75% of the people who answered the question were not or did not have a business plan. So I would just like to give people a real brief overview of business plan. And my goal here is to introduce the concept to you, but to have you then go and do some research on your own to get some of the specifics or contact your local small business development center. A business plan, one of my mentors once told me, is like a roadmap. If somebody told you to meet them at a certain address in New York City, you would probably, most of us these days would probably get on an app and punch in the address, and the app would route us there. And that's what a business plan is. It's the route. It's the initial route, at least, that we set up to get us to where we want to go, whether our goal is profitability or helping people or independence from a job, which is very common. We need a map how to get there, and that's what the business plan is. You're going to see on the left there of the slide that's on your screen right now, there are several different formats, and the format is not terribly important. What's important is the concept, but you need a format to sort of get things started. So I want to talk about these four formats are probably the most common ones. And let me say before I begin that business plans are no longer long documents with a lot of verbiage and a lot of graphs and charts in them like they were 20, 25 years ago. Attention spans, I think, have gotten a lot shorter, and people can convey their messages and people understand those messages in a lot shorter format. So a traditional business plan is still going to be anywhere from probably 10 to 20 pages long, and it's going to have all of the information that you're going to see over on the right side. The executive summary business plan is going to be about 1 or 2 pages long, and it's going to be almost like a teaser. It's what gets people information to tell them or help them decide whether or not they're interested in learning more about your business. The business model canvas is something that has come up within the last probably 5 or 10 years. A lean business model is what this rolled out of. And it's another way, another method of thinking about a lot of these concepts on the content side in a one-page format. And then a pitch deck is something that's kind of come out of the tech world and has rolled into the rest of the startup world, and it is very focused. It's very anywhere from probably 8 to 15 slides on a pitch deck to give people the information about your business. And if you look at those links below, I'd like you to go and take a look. There's some for each of those formats to kind of give you some ideas of what they look like and what would be included in those. The content now on the right side of the screen there, this is the important stuff. This is what is going to separate you from all the other businesses that you're competing with out there. And you're going to see different sections in business plans and different headings, but this is the information that they're all going to contain. We need a high-level description of what you're doing. For some people, that's very easy. I'm starting a barbecue restaurant. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Is that okay? Market research. We need to know who your competitors are and who your customers are. You don't want to go into business without knowing both of these things. They're very important, and you could have multiple levels of customers. Not everybody is just targeting one individual or one type of person. Operationally, we want to know what the model of your business is going to be. How are things going to actually work? This can be, again, very simple. If it's a restaurant, for an example, what are your hours going to be? How many employees are you going to have? Is it going to be walk up to the counter? Is it going to be a drive-through? It's kind of the nitty-gritty details of how the business is going to work. It's very important to identify who the key personnel are going to be and what their backgrounds are. And this is extremely important, not just for you, but for anybody who's looking at your business plan, to help you decide if there are any holes in your management team. Somebody needs to be responsible for everything, and somebody should have a background, hopefully, or be willing to learn about everything in the business. And when I say everything, I'm talking about the financial side of things, the marketing side of things, the sales side of things, and the operations side of things. And then the last section is probably one of the most important, especially if you're looking to get funding from the outside. Financially, how much are you going to need? What are you going to use that money for? And then what do you project the business is going to produce in terms of profit and loss, and how quickly can you get to profitability?
Absolutely great. Thank you so much. I think this is probably the single most important thing in thinking about starting a business or in that first year is getting this bit right. And you can get some great advice from small business development centers. And like Alex said, that, towards the end of this slide deck, there'll be a link to information about the small business development centers near you. There'll also be a link to SCORE, which is a voluntary organization that provides expert mentors at no cost to you. So again, there'll be a link to that as well. And I'll just move on to our last question. And I know people are anxious to get ahead with the Q&A piece. So this is our last question for Alex. I am starting a business. What are the best sources of funding for me to consider to help me get going?
Well, it looked like from the question that you asked earlier, about 25% of the people had enough funding on their own. And to those people, I say congratulations. That's fantastic. That's number one on the list: personal funds, and by far, that's the majority of businesses that get started in this country. Estimates range from about 2/3 to 80% get started using personal funds. Next, this is also very common, getting money from friends and family, people who believe in you and are willing to back you. If you're going to do that, I advise you to document the transaction, whether it be a loan, an investment. Make sure that there's paperwork and get an attorney involved if you need to. Third is personal loans, which are usually something like a home equity loan or a credit card. Those are, when you've run out of the personal funds and the friends and family, that's probably the next thing that people draw into. Not everybody has access to that, and it can be very, very expensive, and you really need to weigh heavily whether or not you want to take on that kind of debt, because it is personal debt and it's going to be recourse to you. business loans, this is the most common one that people think about when it comes to getting funding for their businesses. It's also one of the most difficult to obtain because banks are conservative by nature and they don't like to take risks. So they don't like to loan money to startups for the most part. And so they're looking for a lot more than just a good idea. And we can help you walk through the requirements there and help you kind of gauge whether or not you have a good chance of getting a business loan. The next two are both also sort of rare. They're difficult to come by, but there are groups out there that invest in small businesses called angel investors, and then a little more sophisticated groups at private equity and venture capital. Those are very sophisticated people who you really want to get some advice before you get involved with those people. Otherwise, you could end up losing your business to them somewhat easily. Crowdfunding, it works better if you have a product that you're selling, not a service or something that's specific. It works good as a pre-sale vehicle to bring money in so that you can actually have the money to produce the product. And then, of course, once you're up and running, getting, and even in the beginning, using your suppliers and vendors to give you terms, that's considered financing as well.
Okay, well, thank you. That is a nice spectrum of options for people. And also mention that the small business team in the Office of the Governor are frequently asked about state funding for small businesses and startups. And our answer to that question is that funding in Texas, broadly speaking, is decentralized, and that the government of Texas disperses the funding out to the communities, the cities, the municipalities, for them to use as they see fit in their community. It allows them to use the funding to suit their own particular needs. Many municipalities, cities, and counties actually have economic development teams that do have supports, including funding for small businesses and startups. So I'm not saying everyone, it's usually the medium to larger ones that do, but it's worth looking into your own local one or the nearest medium-sized city or larger city to see, do they have small loans or small grants for businesses? In many cases they do, particularly now during this crisis. So I just wanted to mention that. So I want to thank my four panelists for doing this section with me, the frequently asked questions piece. And I'm going to now hand over to my colleague Jarvis, who is going to look after the live Q&A. So over to you, Jarvis.
Yes, and thank you, Kelly, and welcome everyone. We have roughly 20 minutes or so to get as many live questions in as we possibly can. So I'm going to go through these very quickly, and thank you all for participating and submitting your questions, and continue to like questions as we go through them. So the first question, I believe, is a little broad, and I'm going to relay it originally to Kevin with the Secretary of State, but I also think that Jessica from the Controller will have something to add with this. So the question is, what about internet sales, such as a website? That's all the question says. I think what they're asking is related to taxing and maybe even registration. So I'll begin with Kevin.
So I'd say for that, I think that's mostly a Comptroller question. I think what the requester is asking about is, how do internet sales impact sales tax? So that's not something the Secretary of State's office would be able to answer, but perhaps the Comptroller can.
All right.
Yeah, I can help with that. So selling online is just the same as selling at a brick and mortar. So when you sell items that are taxable, you will still collect sales tax on that item when you sell to a Texas location or it's delivered to a Texas location.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, the reason why I relayed it to you, Kevin, was I just wanted to know if there's any kind of requirements as far as filing or entities. Can a sole proprietorship have the same capability as an LLC of making sales online?
Yeah, I'd say that as far as filing with the Secretary of State's office goes, and in general forming your entity, there's no real requirements that you set out exactly what you're going to be doing. So you wouldn't need to tell us, hey, I'm going to be selling things online or anything like that, at least not with the Secretary of State's office and not as part of creating your business.
Perfect. So to clarify, what your entity is, it's not really detailing what you do. Jessica, did you have something else to add to that? I believe you're muted.
There we go. Hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so I wanted to also mention we have a great publication for that type of question. If they go to our website, it's on publication 94-171.
Perfect. Could you repeat that again?
Yes, publication 94-171. And all they got to do is just type that in the top find bar, like a search bar, and it'll bring up the publication for them.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stick with you. We're getting a lot of popular tax questions. So next couple may be related to you. This next question comes from Kim. If you provide a service without selling any products, what taxes will you have to file?
That, once again, depends what type of service you're providing. We have a list of taxable services under our statute 151.0101. List them. We also have a great publication that breaks it down for them. That's going to be found on publication 96-259. And I can give an example like, real property, repair or modeling of real property. So depending how, you're operating there, you may be subject to sales tax because even though it's a service. So it really just depends. That's a big question. But that publication breaks it down for them depending on what is being done because we have 17 categories of taxable services.
Okay, and I think this next question also deals with the same thing. You may have just answered it. This question comes from Charlotte. Where can I find a list of services that I need to collect sales tax on?
Yep, that statute. But if you want to find something more easier to understand and give examples, I would first start with our publication. Once again, that's 96-259.
Thank you again, Jessica.
Sure.
This next question is an SBA related question, but I'm going to refer to Alex with the SBDC. The question is, I've been looking at resources to support my business. I noticed some entities like SBA and banks only support businesses that have been active for a minimum of 3 years and have reported revenue. What resources do you recommend in this case? So Alex, the question is, I'm a new business. I don't have the track record behind me of 3 years or more. How can I get funding?
Sure. The questioner makes a kind of a good distinction, although I'm not sure she even realized it, between the larger banks and a lot of the smaller banks. The SBA, by the way, does not make loans. The SBA guarantees loans that the banks make to the customers. So the SBA really doesn't have a policy about how long you've been in business, but many of the large banks do. And they say we can't lend you money unless you've been in business for at least 2 years or 3 years. So the smaller banks are a better place to start. I like to tell people, if you're driving down the street and you see a bank that you've never heard of, pull in and ask them about a business loan. That's usually a good place to start. Another place that's really good for startup businesses are community-based lenders. In Texas, we've got several, Lift Fund and People Fund and Dream Spring. Those are three of the more popular ones at least that we work with. These are nonprofit lenders that are solely exist to help people start businesses in areas or with situations that the larger banks won't deal with or don't want to deal with. They started off making loans as small as $500, and now they can do loans up to $1 million. But a lot of them, the loans are still in the $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 range, and so those are real good resources too. And those are called community-based lenders. And if you have again, contact your local SBDC. They can get you in touch with those, or if you want, we can get you that information as well.
Thank you, Kevin. And that is great information. So the CDFIs are community lenders, CDFI being community development financial institutions. Great place. And as he also mentioned, the hometown banks, the smaller locations. So thank you, Alex, so much for that. That's a very common question that we get. This next question comes from Janie. And again, it's a tax related question for Jessica. Is there a possibility that a business not have to pay a franchise tax? What's the threshold amount? For example, what after I've earned how many dollars do I have to pay this franchise tax?
Okay, I guess. So a business, if you're operating once again as a corporation or a limited liability company, you're automatically subject to this tax. You will file a report even if no taxes are due. And far as our threshold, it does fluctuate. It fluctuates like every 2 years. Currently, it's set at $1,180,000. So if your total revenue from the corporation's under that amount, well then no taxes would be due, which means you qualify to file our no tax due report. And if it's over the threshold, you file one of our other 2 reports. But either way, you still have to file the report because you're letting us know that you are in business, what you're doing, and therefore you will be in current status with the state of Texas.
Thank you, Jessica. And I'll stick right with you as tax is the theme of the day.
Yes.
The next question, how can I determine if some or all of my technical services are taxable?
Now that is a big question. That's something we'll have to look at. What do you do? There's not just a general answer for that. It all depends what you're doing. And for that, I was just to look at our website, or you can email us for further assistance on that question. That's a big question.
Agreed. All right, we'll move along, and we have a question for Kevin with the Secretary of State's office. And Kevin, this question it's about registration. Can I list 2 different services under the same LLC? For example, I have a real estate business and an HVAC service business.
Yeah, so that's a mostly simple question. I will note before I answer it generally that if you have specific services which require you to have a license, for instance, like a doctor or an attorney or something like that, this answer will be different. And I'm talking about specifically licenses, not certifications or something like that. If you have a license, the answer is different. Otherwise, generally, any business can have any number of purposes in its certificate of formation, or if you look at our forms, what most businesses have is what's called a general purpose clause, and that is just a statement in the formation documents that says this entity is being formed for any and all lawful purposes that an entity can be formed for. And if you have that general purpose clause in there, you can do anything. So you could run a burger restaurant, a shoe store, and whatever else, and that would be totally fine. So to answer the question explicitly, yes, you could have both of those 2 purposes in the same entity. You could have even more than that, but you also don't need to specify. And I will give a quick caveat. I see a lot of people that do specify in their certificate of formation, I'm going to be a burger restaurant. You don't need to do that. But if you do, you are actually limiting yourself to only doing that ever. So if you have a business and you think you might one day want to expand and do something else, you might consider just using the general purpose clause, unless there's some other reason why you need to list a specific purpose. Certainly you don't have to with our office, so there's not necessarily a reason to do that.
Jarvis, can I add something there?
Yes, absolutely.
I just want to make sure that whoever asked the question, realizes that there's liability issues there with your 2 businesses, and you might want to talk to an attorney about doing that, because if something bad were to happen in one of your businesses and they're both under the same LLC or corporation, that could bring down your other business as well. So just consider that.
Thank you, gentlemen. That is great information of both sides, the generalists as well as having one entity can be effectively liable for both services provided within it. So thank you so much for that. This next question I am going to relay to Sonia. This one is more of a licensing and permits question, and it comes from Latoya. If I am investing in real estate, meaning I am purchasing homes to rent out under my LLC, do I need a sales permit? So my occupation is I rent out these properties, do I need a sales permit? And this also may go into Jessica.
Well, actually, Jarvis, I would direct that question to Jessica because that's more of a comptroller's sales tax question.
Okay, so this is the one about the rental, you said, for
Right.
rental of the homes. So when you have real estate, you know, when you sell that, that's not subject to sales tax when you sell real estate. Now, if you are renting out your home for people to stay, that's actually going to be subject to hotel occupancy tax. Where if like I have my home and I decide to rent it out for more than $15 a day to people, they call that short-term rental now, that you'll need to get permitted as hotel occupancy tax to collect the tax and remit that to the state. And as well, you might want to get in contact with your local authorities because you'll possibly need to contact local hotel occupancy tax as well.
Thank you, Jessica.
Sure.
And this next question, again, I'm going to go back to Alex. I believe we covered this with the CDFIs and the local banks, but I just want to address the question explicitly. So the question is, in my experience, SBA lenders have been limiting funds to existing businesses only, and mostly COVID related. Are there other resources for a startup to get access to financing needing to launch a business? So I'll reiterate again.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of seen a tightening of credit as well, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily completely shut off credit to the startups. Startups have always been a difficult fund for a lot of lenders, and it's gotten a little more difficult. But those CDFIs that we talked about earlier and those smaller local banks are the ones that are probably going to be your best bet. You know, if there's also the SBA has a lender match program. If you Google SBA lender match, and we can get you that link too, where you can fill out a form and it goes and it tries to match you with several thousand actually lenders all across the country who would be interested in your kind of the deal that you have working. So that might be another place to try. You still have to do your own due diligence on that lender because there can be some very expensive money in there as well. But that's another possibility.
Thank you, sir. And this next question, I'm going to actually go back to Kevin with this. This is a Secretary of State's question. If I have a sole proprietorship, can I change it to an LLC? So I filed with my county clerk and I created this sole proprietorship. Now I want to be an LLC. Can I then convert that structure, that entity, to a state level LLC?
Yeah, so this question is an interesting one. The very, very simple answer is yes. The long answer is no. That's because a sole proprietorship isn't really an entity in the same way an LLC is. An LLC is a distinct entity. It's a legal person under the law, whereas a sole proprietorship sort of just is the individual. Like you don't create a sole proprietorship, you create a business, and the filings just reflect that the sole proprietorship exists, versus an LLC, which you actually do create. So that's the long answer in that no, you wouldn't do that. But the short answer that really probably the questioner Lisa was asking is, if I have a sole proprietorship, can my business become an LLC? And the answer is yes. As far as requirements with our office goes, you would just create that LLC. Now in the back end, you'd want to make sure that you get everything transferred over properly, like if you've got contracts and that sort of thing. Just keep in mind that you've created a new entity. So everything that you have under the sole proprietorship needs to somehow be transferred over and put under the hood of the LLC. But it can be done, and definitely if you're operating a sole proprietorship and you take a look at LLCs and the benefits there and think, hey, I want these liability protections or something like that, it's something you want to consider doing. And I bet that some of the other panelists here might have some resources that could help you do that as well in the background.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Thank you. This next question is, I believe, it originally looks very simple and straightforward. It comes from Lynette, and the question is, can I open my business at home, a converted garage space specific for my business, or does it have to be a brick and mortar? So I'm going to simply answer this one, yes. However, I know that what the business is matters. So I think Kevin as well as Sonia may have some suggestions on this matter. So I'm going to start with Kevin to just really answer, can someone open a business from home?
Yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. Texas, if you're forming an LLC or something like that, you don't have to have a physical location at all. If you look at the documents you file with our office, you never have to state, this is the principal office location of my business. It doesn't have to be a commercial property or something like that. So yeah, you could absolutely use a converted garage space if you wanted to, at least as far as our office is concerned. Now you might have local regulations that prevent you from doing something like that, and maybe Sonia can speak to those. But as far as the Secretary of State is concerned, we don't have an issue with that. We wouldn't know where your business is located anyway, so it definitely wouldn't be a problem with us.
Yes, and Sonia, would you like that?
Certainly. Adding on to one of the key points that Kevin mentioned was that it depends on what you're doing in your home. What I would advise is, number one, to consult with the comprehensive license and permitting guide to look for your business type. And there you would be able to identify what permits, license, and regulations are applicable to that business type at the state level. Once that's done, then the recommendation would be to connect with your city and or your county in order to find out what their local criteria are, because there may even be a home-based business ordinance that's applicable. So typically that's downloadable from their website, or they could send that to you, and it basically outlines the do's and don'ts for running a business from your home and the types of businesses that are allowed in your particular geographic area.
Thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Kevin. I'm going to stick right with you, Kevin, and we're in the last few minutes of our webinar, so we're going to do a little bit of a rapid fire. This next question, we've talked a lot about LLCs and sole proprietorships. This next question is simply from Peter. Can you discuss DBAs/assumed names? So sole proprietorships, county clerk, giving it to you, Kevin.
Yeah, so, well, like you just mentioned, if you've got a sole proprietorship, it is filed with the county clerk. If you've got an LLC or something like that, it's probably filed with us. So first you need to identify where you file these. You need to identify, hey, what's my entity type? So again, sole proprietorships, general partnerships are the major ones that are going to file with your local county clerk, or potentially the county clerk wherever you're doing business. So it could be that you have to file it in multiple counties. Different counties will also have their own rules in addition to the general state rules. So definitely check with the local county if you plan on doing business there and you're a sole proprietorship or general partnership. The law recently changed for LLCs, corporations, and that sort of thing. Filing entities with the Secretary of State's office now don't need to file with the county. You simply file with the Secretary of State's office. It's very easy to do. You go on SOS Direct, which I provided a link for earlier. Costs $25. You file it online. It's a very simple form. It gets processed in literally about 25 or 30 minutes, and you're done. So very easy, and hopefully that's what you were looking for.
Well, I just want to reiterate, what is a DBA? DBA stands for doing business as and assumed name.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit as well. So a DBA legally is any name other than the entity's legal name that you are doing business under. So for an LLC, let's say your LLC's name is ABC LLC, but you're going to operate Kevin's Law Firm. So in that case, Kevin's Law Firm is a DBA because it's different than my legal name, which is ABC LLC. To expand upon that, even let's again say LLC, ABC LLC, and I just call myself ABC, technically that is an assumed name as well. So for all of those, if I'm using any different name, I need to file it with the Secretary of State's office. Same thing at the sole proprietor level. Again, a sole proprietor is the individual. So if I, Kevin Tipton, have a sole proprietorship and I'm operating under any other business name, then I need to file an assumed name for that. So again, you can contact your local county clerk if you're a sole proprietorship, and they'll be able to walk you through the steps to do that.
Thank you. And again, I want to reiterate, I think the question was more concerned at that sole proprietorship level. That is not a filing through the Secretary of State's office. That's going to be through your local county clerk's office. And as Kevin mentioned, it just means if, let's say your name is Kevin, you want to operate a different name, that's where you would do that assumed name with your county clerk. So moving forward, this next question is a funding question again. It comes from Latoya. Any assistance on finding and applying to grants for nonprofits / for-profit businesses? I'm going to originally throw that to Alex, and actually, Kelly, if you have anything to say about funding as well. So I'm going to go to you, Alex.
There aren't a whole lot of sources of consistently given out grants for businesses. I know a little less about nonprofits, but when it comes to businesses, the grants that are usually given out are generally from either because of where you're located, because of the industry that you're in, or any special subgroup that you might be in as an owner. So for instance, if Kelly referred earlier to some of the grants that cities give out, that could be something. If you're going to bring jobs to a city, if you're going to bring some sort of economic tax base to a city, you might be able to get a grant there. Occasionally, you'll see a lender or a large corporation that wants to publicize. Maybe it's women-owned businesses, and so they will say, we're going to offer 100 grants of $10,000 each to women this month, and you have to go online here to apply. Those are more on an ad hoc basis, but just Googling those types of things, your location, the industry you're in. Sometimes industry associations give out grants, so that's another possibility. For instance, Whole Foods, I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but they used to give out grants to food entrepreneurs who are trying to get products that they could eventually put on their shelves. And so it was a good business decision for them, but it also helped those entrepreneurs. So that's the type of places you might want to look. And I would just say Google it often and try to keep up with things.
Great. And actually, I'll jump in there and just add a few things. And Alex is absolutely right. The grant scene is ever evolving. It isn't static. And it isn't as the opportunities within grants aren't as big as people are led to believe. It's a very specific thing. All of the things that Alex mentioned are absolutely relevant and a great place to start. For nonprofits, you should look at foundations. There are many foundations, large, well-funded foundations that will actually provide or fund nonprofits if you are doing something that is within their remit or interest field. So definitely look at large foundations. I think minority organizations often have grants, especially for starting up. So veterans organizations, they're not necessarily minority, but veterans organizations have some funding too for startups. Women's organizations, minority organizations, all are interested in that whole sort of startup scene and small business scene. It's well worth looking at those. Again, those can change though. The Department of Agriculture generally has some level of grant for young farmers, but also for food businesses sometimes. And I guess I wrote a load of things down there, but they're also sort of infrequent. They change. So like Alex said, the best advice is to keep Googling it and ask people who may have similar interest fields to yourself. Jarvis, we probably don't have any more time for any more questions, do we?
No, and we've actually gone over our time, but even with that, I see our participants is extremely high even at this second. So thank you everyone for participating, staying here. I know we went through a lot of information in an hour. Thank you to our panelists for participating, provided a wealth of information, but at this time we'll go ahead and close the event. And if obviously we didn't get to everyone's question, but as Kelly mentioned earlier, the contact information is coming up shortly. So over to you, Kelly.
Great, and thank you, Jarvis. And I'll just show you these slides. There's no need to take anything down. These will be available to you after this event. We will send you an email with links to the slides and the transcripts, and also a link to our survey. And we really do want you to answer that survey. And in the free text fields, please tell us what you think. We definitely want to know, and we want to use that to constantly improve what we're doing here. So again, like Jarvis said, thank you for joining us. This is information about the resources to do with the Office of the Governor. this is information, broadly speaking, from our panelists, but a few other things are also here. I have a link at the bottom there to your local SCORE office. Like I said, SCORE is a voluntary mentor organization. They will provide you with an expert mentor for free. And absolutely do consider that, especially if you're at that early stage in thinking about starting up, or in the first 12 months of starting up. You can always benefit from an experienced mentor. And as we saw from the numbers that you all clicked and liked, that there were quite a few people in the audience who are just thinking about starting up, or who have already just started up in the last 12 months. So there are a couple of links that came up in the course of the event. I'll add them to this slide. So don't worry if you don't see them here and you were interested in them, I will add them. And I am now going to hand it over to our Executive Director, Adriana Cruz, to close out the event.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and thanks to everybody for joining today. Again, please utilize our office. Please utilize the contacts that have been provided to you and the resources that have been provided to you, and hope you'll join us again, and have a great day. Thank you.
Great, and thank you. We're now going to close the event. Thank you.